Before we get started, disclaimer, I am not a physical therapist, chiropractor, or licensed medical professional. I am a strength and conditioning professional, so this is for educational purposes. With that out of the way, let's talk about them knees that hurt. Other than lower back, knee pain is probably the second most common thing that plagues us aging athletes and definitely us former warfighters. Now, freak accidents and overuse injuries notwithstanding, there's a couple of key contributors to knee pain that kind of often go overlooked that I'm going to address in this video. So your knee ostensibly is a simple hinge joint, but it does serve a couple other functions as well due to the musculature. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a comprehensive anatomy lesson on all the different ligaments and everything like that. What I want to focus on specifically is the musculature, starting with the hammies. Now, the hammies are a key component of your posterior chain, and they do a bunch of things that involve the knee, starting with knee flexion. So that's bending the knee. They do contribute to hip extension, although they're more a stabilizer. The prime driver should be your glutes. And then the other things they do that a lot of people don't consider is they contribute to posterior pelvic tilt. So that's kind of like rounding your back when you're standing up. And then they also contribute to internal and external tibia rotation as well. So you can think of that as like pivoting your toes kind of inward towards your center line or outward away from your center line at the heel. Now, why is this important? It's important because if your hamstrings are tight or more than likely weak, because a lot of people don't necessarily prioritize hamstring training other than some strength athletes and, certain sports that require it, like, track and field. But just many casual gym goers and certainly a lot of field sport athletes that are most prone to knee injuries, like basketball players and soccer players, they don't do a lot of direct hamstring work. And so these areas become weak. And what can happen specifically in regards especially to the field sports athletes that do a lot of rapid direction changes like basketball and soccer players, the hamstring muscle basically keeps the tibia from sliding forward on the femur, and it takes a lot of stress off that anterior cruciate ligament, the ACL. And so if you're in particular a basketball player, if you're kind of built like me except the stretched out version, so you have extra long femurs and you're like 6'4", and you're doing a lot of like cutting and sprinting, direction changes and jumping, things like that, and you have weak hamstrings, what's going to happen is that tibia is going to keep trying to slide forward on the femur because you're pulling on it with your quad, doing all these movements. And when your hamstring's weak or when it's tight, and so there's a down regulation of force production in the hamstring, that ACL is just going to get chipped away and chipped away and chipped away and chipped away and chipped away until eventually you try to do a crossover on somebody and boom, your ACL pops. Remember how I also said the hamstring assists in internal and external rotation of the tibia? Another common injury you see are meniscus tears. So the meniscus, if you look here, is kind of like a disc type structure that sits on top of the tibia. And what your hamstring does is it gives you rotational support on account of being able to internally and externally rotate the tibia. And this is particularly key, again, to you like field/ball sport players like soccer and basketball. Similar to the previous scenario with the ACL, you have weak hamstrings and you're doing a lot of cutting, stopping, and turning, and it can be snap city just from overuse. So we've talked a lot about the hammies, but let's move on to the calves, specifically the gastrocs. All right? So the gastrocs is that big meaty portion on the top part of your calf right underneath the knee. And it's there because it also helps support the knee from the bottom. Now, I've heard a lot of athletes, both in strength sports and in field sports, essentially say that doing calf work is useless because it's mostly genetic. Your calves either respond or they don't. I've heard a lot of athletes who do a lot of jumping in their sport say that they don't need to do calf training because they get plenty of calf training when they jump. And And all of this is incorrect. Well, not necessarily you might be a non-responder to growth on account of genetics. That much is true. Calves are one of those like weird things where it doesn't specifically follow the kind of hand-wavy rules of muscular hypertrophy. But in terms of building your calves for jumping and all that kind of stuff, your jumping ability mostly comes from, number one, like hip drive, and then number two, stretch reflex in the Achilles tendon. The gastroc muscle in particular has very little to do with your jumping ability. That's why you see a lot of basketball players, for instance, or like the Maasai in my native Kenya that are very good at jumping. They have very small, high calves, but very long Achilles tendon, so that the tendon is extremely leveraged for the myotatic reflex, the stretch reflex, to rebound a ton of force when you stretch it and then flex it again. So jumping is not going to build your calves. And the reason why I'm going on about this is because, increased cross-sectional area of your calf, a bigger, stronger calf, is another way you can kind of ironclad your knee joint from the bottom in a not identical to, but similar fashion as the hamstring supports the knee from above. This reason, folks, and this reason alone is why I do a lot of calf and hamstring work, because as a former warfighter that's done far too much running and rucking for his own good, I make sure to do everything that I can to maintain a decent amount of muscle mass in these areas, because there's some of the first use it or lose it muscle that goes as you start to age. And sarcopenia, age-related muscle wasting, is a very precipitous, slippery slope if you don't do anything to attempt to arrest it. So if you're having some knee pain symptoms from running, playing sports, squatting, or just getting old, do some calf and hamstring work. Strengthen them up. My recommendations as a strength coach as to how to do that: light to moderate weight, high volume. 3 to 5 sets, once or twice a week, 10 plus reps. It doesn't have to be leg day either. Just toss it on at the end of whatever. Pick a calf exercise, seated or standing, knock it out. Pick a hamstring exercise, lying leg curls, seated leg curls, RDLs, whatever you like, knock it out. The important thing is that you're consistent so you can stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.